Soul and R&B music is the cornerstone of 20th century music.
Since you've been away, I've been praying every day. God, to make me strong till you get back home.
Also was influential not just in secularizing gospel, but when it linked with the civil rights movement, then it was also important in a way beyond music too.
What becomes of the brokenhearted who had love that's now departed? I know I've got to find some kind of peace of mind, maybe.
Soul and R&B continues to stand on its own as this huge genre with a massive legacy of incredible singers.
Soul music came from two very specific strands. It came from, first of all, gospel. This initially developed as a sort of bush telegraph amongst the slaves of Southern America. By the 40s, gospel had become galvanized by preachers and choirs from the evangelical churches.
The church, I think, was central to it because it was a place where people's spirits could be lifted, and that act of singing together was very joyful, very triumphant. And what you get is this move from gospel music into more secular music, but retaining that gospel feeling and that gospel sound.
This newfangled energy really took off in the 40s, and you had people such as Sister Rosetta Tharpe.
Didn't it rain, children? Rain, oh yes. Didn't it? Yes, didn't it? You know it did, didn't it? Oh, oh yes.
She was an extraordinary force of nature. Not only did she sing, but she played the guitar.
Let's do that again.
This paved the way for one strand of soul.
The other side of it was R&B, and R&B was really a kind of fusion of blues and jazz, and you had, I think New Orleans was very, very important. You had a producer called Dave Bartholomew, who would take Latin rhythms and he'd combine them with a kind of, combine them with blues. And that's how and then he produced Fats Domino and people like that.
This is what came together, that energy and soul bearing of gospel and the sense of R&B, the driving guitar, blues-based sound. And it came together for something that was special and became known as soul.
Gladys Knight was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and she came from a singing family. She was singing in the Baptist church at the age of 4. Then she formed the Pips with her brother and her cousins.
This was very much how they evolved from family parties, and then they slowly, very slowly, moved out into the wider Atlanta circuit.
By 1955, the Pips were performing and touring on Atlanta's talent show network, and by 1957 they signed with Brunswick Records.
Every beat of my heart, there's a beat for you.
They had a song called Every Beat of My Heart, and this went to number 6 in the American charts. And it was also the first of many, many number ones for Gladys Knight of the Pips on the R&B charts.
In all my conversation, you're mine.
Levi Stubbs and Dig Fakir performed together at school. They were doo-wop singers, and then they met the other two, Obie Benson and Lawrence Payton, at a party, and then they became the Four Ames, who were pretty big, but only in a local sense. And when they signed to Chess in 1956, then they changed their name to the Four Tops.
When she was my girl, there was laughter and loving in my world every day.
Billy Davis introduced the Four Tops to Berry Gordy, who signed them to Motown Records. But initially, as session musicians, they sang backing vocals on tracks like Run, Run, Run by the Supremes.
He didn't actually see them as bands in their own right until the Funk Brothers, which is Motown's in-house backing band. They had this instrumental track and they didn't really know what to do with it. And they gave it to the Four Tops. It's called Baby, I Need Your Loving. And that became their first hit for Motown.
'Cause lately I've been losing sleep. Baby, I need your loving. Got to have all your loving. Baby, I need your loving. Got to have all.
Once they had a hit, then the formula was established, and they would never really deviate from that. It's just that the songs and the performances and the production would get better and better and better.
I've passed this way before, and I felt this pain before. I heard that took so long to end, has found my poor heart again. Yeah.
Jimmy Ruffin was born in 1936 in Collinsville, Mississippi, and he grew up in great poverty. He was a sharecropper's son, and his musical background was very, very gospel. And he and his brother, David Ruffin, who would later be the Temptations singer, they grew up in the church system, and they sang in churches for their very, very poor family and friends.
Jimmy Ruffin actually joined Motown in 1961, but had to leave when he was drafted into the army. Following his discharge, though, he returned to Motown and began working with them again in 1964.
Now, he didn't sign as a major act. He signed essentially to be a backing singer for other acts with an opportunity for career progression. This is what Motown did with a lot of their acts. Very few were signed to be made stars. Once you were in the Motown factory, you had to fight for your place.
After a couple of songs, he had one of the all-time great lamenting Motown love songs, which is What Becomes of the Brokenhearted.
What becomes of the brokenhearted who had love that's now departed? I know I've got to find some kind of peace of mind, maybe.
It's an extraordinary song. It's broken-hearted, it's incredibly personal, but there's also, I think, a political undertow to it as well. That he's talking about looking out over wastelands, and he does sound genuinely bereft.
I can't stand this pain much longer. I walk in shadows, searching for light. Cold and alone, no comfort inside. Hoping and praying for someone who cares. Always moving and going nowhere.
Now, this song was originally written for the Spinners, but Jimmy Ruffin heard it and he asked, I think begged is probably a more appropriate word, to be able to record it. And he'd spotted a great song, and he'd also understood that he would do justice to this classic song in a way that nobody of the many people who followed him covering it would do.
What becomes of the broken hearted who had love that's now departed? I know I've got to find some kind of peace of mind.
L.A. proved too much for the man.
Too much for the man, he couldn't make it.
So he's leaving the life he's come to know.
Gladys Knight and the Pips, who got back to being big, they had a single called Giving Up, which was a hit, and that came out on Max Records, and now Motown were interested. And Berry Gordy wanted to sign Gladys Knight, but initially she didn't want to go with Motown. I think one of the reasons actually was that 65, Motown was at its height. You know, it had the Supremes, it had the Temptations, it had these huge bands who were having massive hits. And she thought, well, we're just going to get lost. Well, he's not going to care about us. But eventually, Berry Gordy did convince her to sign.
Here I am, take me in your arms and love me. Oh baby, my love is good, my love is sweet. Now's the time that I'll live sleep. Hold me, boy, don't hesitate. I need you now, don't make me wait. You're the one that
First Gladys Knight classic was really Take Me in Your Arms and Love Me, which went to number 98 on the American charts, and it was a top 20 hit in Britain. And this really set out the template for what they would do for the next few decades.
any second now I'll explode. Now's the time, take all of this love of mine.
Her fantastic, really imperious voice over the Pips' cooing backing. And that was how Gladys Knight and the Pips would make their name and their fortune.
Incredibly, Gladys Knight recorded the original version of I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which is written by Norman Whitfield. Everyone knows the Marvin Gaye version, but hers came out in 67. It was actually before Marvin Gaye.
It was very different to the subsequent, possibly more heralded versions that were to come. It was much less paranoid than Marvin Gaye's version would be. And it had a kind of southern soul feel to it as well. And this was Gladys Knight really singing her way to heartbreak, as she so often did.
When you snap your finger or wink your eye, I come running to you. I'm tied to your apron string, and there is nothing that I can do.
In 1965, the Four Tops had their first #1 with I Can't Help Myself, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch. And this was a song that sounded like a classic Motown record. It had everything that the Motown records of the time had. But what it had on top of that was Levi Stubbs's baritone. And this is what made the Four Tops different. Unquestionably, Levi Stubbs is not just one of the great Motown singers, he's one of the great singers of all time, without question.
The Four Tops released a series of pretty successful singles, but then they were given the Holland Dozier Holland track, Reach Out, I'll Be There, which has been described as a soul symphony. It's got this epic epic sound to it, and it is their first #1 not only in the US but also in the UK, and remains their biggest charting song.
Reach Out, I'll Be There. It was a #1 in Britain, a #1 in America, and is obviously one of the finest records ever made. It's an extraordinary, almost symphonic piece. The production is impeccable.
Jimmy Ruffin decided by 1970 that he should concentrate on his career in the UK, where he was still a much bigger selling artist.
As I watch love walking away, it brings back old memories.
And he had a very pure, very soulful, very affecting voice. And I think he wasn't the biggest of the Motown stars, but he was kind of somehow one of the most moving. There's something about his singing style which you really believe it, and I think that was where his power lay.
Now there's nothing left but emptiness.
Berry Gordy himself described him as an absolutely exceptional singer. He had one of Motown's biggest hits, but also he really helped to establish that northern soul scene which was happening in northern cities across England.
Jimmy Ruffin was a classic soul crooner. He showed that a voice could not only transcend some of the material that he was given, but he could make a good song great. And that really is the secret to being a soul singer.
He's leaving on that midnight train to Georgia. Yeah.
Neither one of us wants to say goodbye was the last great Gladys Knight hit on Motown. And after that, the relationship between artist and label soured. Berry Gordy was concentrating much more on Diana Ross and some of his other acts. And I think they felt that they were getting lost. And they took the decision to sign to Buddha Records. Now, once they were on Buddha, then they would be the most important act on that label. And the hits kept coming. They had Midnight Train to Georgia, the Gene Pitney song, which is a beautiful song, so full of yearning and loneliness and hope.
I'm always leaving on that midnight train to Georgia.
She remains today the only artist to have top 10 hits before signing to Motown, during her Motown period, and after Motown as well. And that's an extraordinary achievement. She was called the Empress of Soul. And I think if you hear some of those songs that she does, then it's pretty obvious why.
She's got one of those incredible voices that's like full of grace and grit at the same time. And I think that's really the legacy of Gladys Knight and the Pips. The Four Tops, I think, were crucial to the creation of that Motown sound in terms of soul and R&B in the 60s. And you can really hear it through those strong, bold songs that they recorded whilst at Motown.
They epitomised the very best of the Motown formula. They had everything. They had the songs, they had the production, they had the slick moves when they took these songs out. But above all, they had Levi Stubbs.
So don't you be